Thank you so much. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited to be with you all today at the first digital conference. So thanks for being here. As Brian mentioned, my name is Kelsey Cohen, and I am a vice president at Edelman Data and Intelligence. So Edelman, you may have heard of that name before. They're a PR firm. And Edelman Data and Intelligence is specifically the market research arm of Edelman. So I do a lot of work providing research for our clients to make decisions. And so that's why I'm here today. So just to give you a sense of what we're going to cover off on today, we're going to talk about the role of data and research in business decision making. So in the session, I'm going to share a little bit about why businesses need data-driven decision making. And what I really mean by that term, what does it mean to be data-driven as an organization, and really how the process works. And I'm going to be sharing some real-world examples from my own experience, some of the work that my teams have done for our clients to show you really how this comes to life and how this works in practice. And then we're going to break out and do some discussion. So before I really get into the thick of it here, I wanted to ask for you all to think about a time in your life when you had to make a big decision. This could be, what college to attend or what major you were going to pursue, or it could even be, a big decision in your personal life. So I want you all to just take a second, and once you have that specific decision in your mind, I want you to take a second to think about all of the different things that factored into that decision. Everything that you weighed, and it might have been consciously you were thinking about it. It might have been a subconscious thing, like a gut feeling, your own intuition about what you thought was best for you or the right thing to do. It might have been more logical, or, it might have been what you thought your parents or your friends would think. Maybe you did your own online research, or you talked to other people who had taken one path or the other to get some of their insight. So just taking a moment to think about kind of what that process was like for you, the factors that you considered, and how you ended up making that choice. Because the truth is that there really isn't much of a difference in terms of the way that you make decisions and how other businesses do. It's a lot more complex in a business scenario because there are a lot more internal stakeholders at the table. And there are a lot of external audiences to keep in mind as well. But really, at the heart of business decision making, it's really not too different from the way that you yourself as an individual make choices. So I'm going to share a little bit about, what the business decision process is like. Just like you, business decision makers are considering a lot of different factors when they're thinking about what's best for their business. So they have to think about what's going to give them the most short-term profits, but also what's going to set their business up for long-term growth and success. They also have to weigh what they feel like is doing right by their shareholders, but also by all stakeholders. And that can be their employees, that can be the customers that they serve, that can be thinking about the environment. And they also need to weigh how they're getting buy-in both from their team members and also senior leadership, and how they're going to get buy-in at that next higher level, whether that's at board level or if that's just kind of getting your boss's buy-in. So it's much like an individual, except there are a lot more factors because you have to think about who else is making this decision with you, and also, who are the different individuals that you're serving and audiences that you're serving in making that decision, from the shareholders to your employees, your customers, etc. So because there are so many different factors to kind of consider for business decision making, increasingly we're seeing that businesses are using data to guide these decisions. And there's a few reasons why data-driven decision making is really helpful. The first is that it gives you some real objective measures that your team can align on, right? If you've got a lot of people around a table making a decision, it really helps to be able to huddle around something objective, not just necessarily that gut instinct, but something that's objective that you can all agree on. These are the most important elements in terms of our decision making. This is what we're all kind of working toward together. The next thing is that it helps weigh the impact of different factors. So on the last slide, I showed that sometimes you've got some things that, not always, but sometimes are at odds with each other. For example, if you're thinking about you're making a decision and you have to weigh the loss of potential short-term profits with the opportunity to set your company up for future success down the line. Sometimes these things are not at odds with each other, but sometimes they are. And so this gives you the ability to really weigh those things against one another. Also, you might have different shareholders that feel different ways, or different stakeholders that feel different ways. And so you need to be able to balance out what's going to be the reaction perhaps of our shareholders in the short term compared to our customers, compared to our employees, compared to all the different audiences that you are considering in your decision making. So having data against those different things helps you objectively weigh the different factors when you make these types of decisions. The next benefit is that it helps you build a case for senior leadership when you're getting buy-in. So, for example, if I want to make a case to my boss to, maybe have them put in a new vending machine in my office, my boss might not be too interested in that. But if I show him the data that says that employees are much more productive if they have their favorite snacks at the office, well, then all of a sudden I just made a better business case for myself than just saying, well, I want there to be a vending machine in the office. And that's a very silly and simple example, but I think it brings to light the way that data can really help make a case at the senior level. A lot of senior leaders are really looking for some of those hard data points before they're willing to make what can be a risky decision sometimes. So that's another way that data is helpful. And then once you've actually kind of made your decision, data is also really helpful in terms of making sure that you made the right decision, right? And tracking how you're delivering on that decision. So it establishes clear metrics for what success looks like if you move forward with this decision. And it also gives you the ability to test and validate against that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go, but I'm just giving you an overview of some of the benefits of data-driven decision making. So before we go any further, I want to give you a very clear definition of what is business-driven decision making. The Harvard Business School defines it as a process of using data to inform your decision-making process and also to validate a course of action before committing to it. So if you look at this definition, the first part is pretty obvious, right? Using data to inform your decision-making. Not a huge aha moment there. But what is really interesting to me about this definition is the second part of it. Not just using it to make a choice, but actually validating a course of action before you move forward. So pilot testing a decision or having metrics in place so that you can determine if you are getting the returns that you expect on a decision before you fully invest in that and before you double down. So I also want to take another deep dive into sort of the cornerstone of this definition, which is data. A lot of times what we think about when we think about data is quantitative data. So data that's in a numerical form. And businesses have a lot of different quantitative data sets that are available to them. For example, stock price is a quantitative data point. Sales data, customer data, data that you might get from a survey with your employees, your customers, et cetera. But there's also the qualitative side of data. And so this is information in a descriptive form, and it's still very valuable. So this could be, observational data. It can be your own personal experience. It can be personal anecdotes that you hear from others sharing their experience. You might get qualitative data from qualitative research methods like focus groups or in-depth interviews. And both quantitative and qualitative data are really important to the decision-making process. It's not just these quantitative metrics that you might immediately think of. So next I'm going to walk through sort of the process of data-driven decision-making. So again, kind of showing how it goes beyond just using data to inform your decision, but also to validate that decision once you've made it. So generally where we start with our clients when they have a big decision to make is we get really granular and really crystal clear on what their business objective is and how to evaluate whether or not they've hit the mark on meeting that business objective. So usually when we meet with clients, the business objective is the pretty easy part. They know what they want to accomplish. Understanding how to evaluate and objectively measure whether or not they've achieved that business objective is a little bit harder. So we really have to work with them in terms of understanding what's the data that we need to make this decision, what's the data that we need to know that we've made the right decision. And from there, we can start to go ahead and collect that data. Oftentimes, there are elements of the data that already exist that we can get our hands on pretty easily and quickly. So, for example, that might be their sales data, their customer data, where they already have an existing customer database. They already have a lot of information that we can use to make the decisions. But oftentimes, we need to go out and collect new data that doesn't exist to help them make their decision making. And oftentimes, that's where my team kind of comes to play, because my team is, we're a research firm. So our bread and butter is doing custom research to provide the data where companies don't have the data they need to make decisions. So at this point, you're identifying the data sources, you're figuring out where you need to collect new data, where you already have data that exists. And then once you have everything that you need, and everything that you need is probably an ideal situation, the reality in the business world is that oftentimes we're working with not an ideal scenario, but we're working with, what's realistic under a certain amount of time and a certain amount of budget. But once we have the data that we have determined is the most important to collect, we're going to take a look at all of that and develop the insights that we need to make our decision. We're going to start to weigh all of those factors that I mentioned earlier in terms of the short-term benefits, the long-term gains, and how people are going to react across the stakeholder ecosystem. And from there, once we've figured out the right decision, the right path forward, we start to take action, but with a process in place to actually assess the impact of that decision. So this is where we really get to that validation point. It's not just about making the decision and moving forward. It's about making sure there's some kind of process in place to understand what happens when we make this decision, and then be able to evaluate, did it have the effect that we were expecting? Do we need to course correct? How can we adjust our approach in order to better deliver if we're not meeting the criteria that we thought that we would in terms of achieving that business objective that we identified at step one? So for the rest of this session, I'm just going to walk through a few different case studies to actually show you kind of how this works in action, because I know it's a lot at the high level. But I think kind of walking through some of these, I'm going to show how some of our clients have decided first how to respond in a crisis, deciding how to invest their marketing dollars, and then deciding whether or not to take a social stand. So the first example is deciding how to respond in a crisis. So this is one of my favorite clients to work with. This is a hair care company that has some products that were facing some allegations from consumers that these products were making their hair fall out. That's a pretty big crisis. People really aren't going to buy your products if they think that it's going to make your hair fall out. So this was something that the company really took seriously. Okay, so what are they going to do in this crisis scenario? The first thing that they wanted to do was understand how big of a deal is this, right? There are some allegations coming out, but, are people really hearing about it? Do people really believe the allegations? How much do we need to proactively as a company come out and say anything about this issue? Should we just let it die down? Do we need to, be really proactive and get out there quickly? So they assessed sort of what information they needed. They needed to know how this was being talked about in the media, how it was gathering steam on social, and they also needed to understand perceptions around it. Do people believe that this is happening, that the company's products are at fault? So what we did, we conducted a media monitoring analysis, one where we were flagging any coverage that was coming in on this issue in real time, and two, where we were analyzing the tone of the articles, who they were placing blame with, how much engagement different articles and also social posts were getting, how much traction this was getting. The other thing we did was we conducted a survey of actual customers and product category users to say, have you guys heard about this? Is there, do you blame this company? What do you think? And our data showed that this issue was gaining a lot of speed. really rapidly. People were very concerned about this, and there were very compelling YouTube videos causing concern about the product. Our survey also showed that a lot of people did place blame on the company. They thought that it was the product's fault. So really, the company could not just stand by and kind of try and sweep this under the rug. They knew that they needed to get out there and make a formal proactive statement. So they did issue a statement, and they also developed a microsite that was entirely focused on talking about the testing of their products for safety, on dermatologists saying that the products are safe, that they've worked in the R&D space with helping evaluate these products. So they developed a full microsite where people could learn more about the issue. And then the last part of this, of course, is understanding if that was the right move, right? So we have ongoing media analyses and tracking surveys to understand how the company's reputation is recovering. And we're doing these on a regular basis, like every 3 months or so, we're doing another survey to see how things are shifting. And interestingly, oftentimes what we see is that the situation gets a little bit worse before it gets better. There was a lot of media coverage around this, and so when we went back into the field with our next survey, we saw that actually more people were aware of this issue than the first time we went into the field. But oftentimes what we'll see is kind of a rebound after that if the companies responded appropriately. But really, it's interesting because we have been doing this work for, the better part of a year now, and we've been able to continually give the company feedback about the way that they're responding. Our surveys showed that while the company definitely needed to respond, they didn't respond strong enough at first. And people felt like they weren't fully addressing the issues and taking ownership. And so we were able to give them that feedback so that they're able to continually correct their own response to this issue. The next example is about investing marketing dollars. So this is a little bit for my marketing folks. I was a marketing major. So this was some work that we did for a major MLB team that may or may not be in my current hometown of Washington. And they were experiencing a situation where they had a lot of declining ticket sales. No one was coming to the games, the stadiums were empty, and the marketing team had to recoup those lost ticket sales, and they did not know how to make that decision. So they came to us, and what we actually did was we aligned with them on what information we needed to kind of make this decision, and how can we create a model with all of the data that we have around your sales data, your marketing data, and also some like extraneous macro factors like your team performance, the weather. What data can we pull all together so we can create a model that will predict what marketing efforts you can make to have an actual impact on sales? So we worked with them, we pulled together, we got access to their sales data, their marketing data, we pulled in data about weather, team performance, all that fun stuff. And we were able to isolate the marketing activities that were driving those ticket sales. And in fact, we were able to pinpoint it down to, if you have it in a trade publication versus if you have an advertisement on print, et cetera, broadcast. So the team was able to shift their marketing dollars to prevent next season. And then in the effort of ongoing measurement, we actually trained their entire marketing team on how to use our model and how they can expand it so that they can keep building on this and they can keep optimizing their marketing mix moving forward, right? So it's not just, we made this decision, you're going to shift more of your dollars into, a TV ad, and that's the end of the day. No, it's all about continually optimizing and making sure that the decisions that we're making are actually, delivering on what we actually set out for at the onset. And then my last example here before we go ahead and take some questions and then do discussion. This is one of my favorite case studies. This is for CVS Pharmacy. And some of you may remember it was a few years ago now, and the CVS Pharmacy was deciding whether or not to remove tobacco products from its stores. Obviously, there's no excitement in terms of what decision they made because everyone knows that CVS did in fact remove tobacco from its stores. But at the time, this was a huge deal because they were having to weigh the loss of up to $2 million in revenue on tobacco products at all of their stores against, the potential gains of being able to live true against their own brand promise and in the long term, really carve out a name for themselves in the healthcare space, right? But this is a really good example of when you're having to weigh between, okay, what are the short-term losses in terms of our revenue that our shareholders are not going to like against the long-term goals and positioning our company for success in the long term when, we're all looking at the same data about, how cigarettes and how tobacco products impact people's health. And how can we say we're a public health company when we're selling tobacco products in our stores, right? So it's not an easy decision. There was a lot of data to weigh. And this case study is actually more so focused on sort of how they made sure that that was the right decision. They knew they wanted to make that call, but they worked with us to make sure that when they rolled out their CVS Quits campaign, that they had some measures in place to make sure that it was the right decision and to understand the impact that was making. And so they did make the decision to remove all of the tobacco products from their stores, and they did it with a huge splash that Edelman ran, CVS Quits. And the impact we were able to measure using a number of different things. One, we looked at the stock price, which actually went up by 10%. That was something that we weren't sure was going to happen. It was possible that was going to have a negative impact, but it actually was positive because people were aligned with what the company was doing. We also conducted a media analysis so that we could understand what the media coverage was of this decision, and was it a positive articles that were coming out, or it was negative articles that were coming out. And then also we did surveys to understand how this impacted people's perception of the company and the corporation. And we were able to see that it was generally having a really big impact on positive perceptions of the company and how much they associated the company with public health, which was ultimately their objective, was to be able to carve out more growth for themselves in the public health and healthcare